Hey everyone, Vincenzo Calla here, and welcome to Let's Discuss Politics. Today, I'm glad to be joined by the Member of Parliament for Kitchener South Hespeler, Valerie Bradford. Thanks, Valerie, for joining me today.
It's my pleasure.
Well, it's so great to have you here today. And before we start, I always like to make a note to the viewers to make sure you're staying updated with me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at BC Productions 25. Check out my website, vincenzocalla.com, and make sure to like, subscribe, and get notifications here on YouTube. So without further ado, let's get this interview started. So our first segment is called Valerie's Story. We'll talk a bit about who Valerie is and her political history. So first off, Valerie, can you tell me a bit about yourself, your story, and how you got your start in politics?
Okay, so I grew up on a dairy farm down near Dunville, Ontario, and that's excellent training for learning about getting up in the morning and working hard and following through and doing your chores. And those are very valuable life lessons that, rural kids have an advantage over urban kids in some respects with that kind of background. So basically, my first career was in the airline industry. I've worked in a number of different careers over the years. I ended up being a single mother. Suddenly found myself in that situation when my kids were only 3, 6, and 7. I'd always been interested in politics, but obviously, if you're a single parent working without a net and working full time, taking courses part time, running your kids around to their activities, they were all on the national figure skating team. It was pretty hectic, so no political aspirations there. But, I did always follow politics. And the Liberal Party seemed to be my natural home. It was, where I felt the most comfortable with their policies. So I ended up moving up to the Waterloo region because of my kids' activities with skating. And it was at that point, as they were getting a little bit older, that I got involved with the local EDA as the policy chair because I feel it's policy that sets apart one party from another. And I just was a policy wonk and I really enjoyed it. But again, it wasn't until my kids got launched successfully that I had a little more time. And so I was due to retire from my job in economic development as a business development officer the end of December 2020. And that's when the nomination was open that fall in our riding at Kitchener South Hespeler. There wasn't an incumbent, so it was an open nomination. So I like to say I retired for 20 minutes and then decided I was going to run for office. And nothing ventured, nothing gained. I thought, well, I'll either win and start on a whole exciting new adventure and career, or I'll lose and get to enjoy my grandchildren a lot more. So either way, I win, right? But nothing ventured, nothing gained. So sure enough, I won the nomination, and then a couple of months later, the writ was dropped, and I ended up winning the election too. So yes, it's been a very exciting journey so far.
So on that, it's so interesting to see how everybody gets into politics. And on that, what sort of made you decide eventually in that nomination race and eventually decide that you were going to jump into federal politics and run for MP in that election?
Well, so I had worked for municipal government like the last 15 years with the city of Kitchener. Previous to that, I had worked for a regional government. And so I understood municipal politics, but when I was following politics, it always seemed to be the federal level that appealed to me the most. And I would say to anyone thinking of running for political office, you have to decide what your areas of interest are, whether it's the school board or municipal level, which are issues much closer to the public, whether it's, schools and healthcare, that would be provincial. But for me, it was always federal, which is really why I couldn't consider it until like I no longer even have a goldfish depending on me. So I'm free to go and spend time in Ottawa because half your time is spent in Ottawa. So it would be very difficult. I don't know how people do it actually with younger families or if they're, from the other side of the country. Like I'm 5.5 hours from Ottawa, whether I fly or I drive, it's 5.5 hours. And that can get to be wearing too on a weekly basis. But for other people that it's a whole day each way, it's quite a commitment. So it was always the federal level that I was most interested in.
So we're going to go on to the next segment now, which is called Serving as an Elected Official, where we'll talk a bit about your experiences and achievements as an elected official. So first off, over the past, it's been about a year and a half or so since the 2021 election, sorry. And you've been the MP for that year and a half. So what has been your favorite part about serving your community as their elected official, as their MP, serving them both, well, first at home, what has been your favorite part about serving them?
So I do love serving my local constituents. In my mind, that's the most important part of the job. And so I'm blessed to have excellent staff that provides excellent service. But I really enjoy the interesting people I get to meet, the organizations, and finding out what they're contributing to our community, the businesses and all the exciting things that they are working on. It's interesting, once you're an MP, anybody will meet with you because they all have a story to tell. And I really, really enjoy the school visits. I think an important part of being a politician is educating young people as to why it's so important to get involved. Like, I'm really glad that you have an interest in politics and that you're involved, because, that's our future. And I tell the students when I go there, the policy decisions and the legislation that we pass in the House of Commons today, they'll impact people my age for 10 or 20 years. But for the younger generation, they'll impact them for 40 or 50 years. So we need to hear from them what they're thinking, what's important, and what they want us to focus on. So that's why student advisor councils are so important, so that we can stay connected and hear from them. So I encourage them to get engaged, vote as soon as they're old enough to. And the stats show that once you vote the first time, you'll keep voting. And I always say, if you don't participate in the electoral process, and if you leave the decision up to somebody else, you may not like their choices. And we unfortunately have very low voter turnout, I think, here in the province of Ontario. This last time was it was a really low percentage of the population that ended up electing an overwhelming majority. That's not necessarily reflective of how the population feels, but they didn't show up to vote. So now you have 4 years to think about that, right?
Well, and it's so important to get involved from any age. I started paying attention to politics when I was in grade four, because that was when there was the 2014 provincial election in Ontario. I sort of watched it, didn't really, I started to understand what it was about, and then I got involved watching it in the 2015 election, and then there was the other elections around those times, and then I started to really get involved in over the past 2 years since the pandemic mostly, and around the 2019 election I started to get involved, and I voted for the first time in the June election in Ontario. I had turned 18 in May, and then I voted in the municipal election. So it's
You.
important to get involved in politics as a young person and just in general, because that's what you do, and it'll impact us. Like you said, it's just important to get involved. But we'll move on now
And
to
one more thing before
yeah,
we leave
yeah,
that, I always tell students, yes, to get involved. First of all, you can get credit for your community service hours, and you will make friends for life because you will find your political home and you'll be with people that share your same values and viewpoints. So you instantly connect with these people and you have friends for life. Like, once you get hooked being involved, you tend to stay involved. So that's a good point.
definitely. And it's just so important. And if you can get involved and just watch the news and pay attention to
Mm-hmm.
what's going on, because it's just so important. But we're gonna move on now to what you've been doing over the past year and a half as the MP. So what has been your favorite achievement as an MP over the past year and a half? And what have you done that you've been proud of?
Well, one of the things that I ran on when I was seeking office was on accessible, affordable childcare. I was a single mother and it wasn't available to me. And I knew it was very important. I had been chair of the Workforce Planning Board of Waterloo, Wellington, Dufferin. We have a very high participation rate here and a very low unemployment rate. Meanwhile, almost 50% of the population are kind of precluded from working sometimes because of childcare responsibilities, especially if you have a couple of toddlers. You can't afford to go to work, it would cost you money. So I was really, really pleased that we were able to get the Early Education and Affordable Childcare Act passed. We already have several provinces 3 years early have already hit the $10 a day, but already we have 85% of women now participating in the workforce. Higher participation rate than men. I think it's about 83%. And it's such a great investment because every dollar that a government invests in childcare, the economy is boosted by $2.50. And given that our biggest challenge right now is lack of workforce, which holds the economy back, and who can afford a home without two incomes these days? So that I know families are struggling with affordability right now. It's really tough. But this has basically been the equivalent of a mortgage payment for many families to get their childcare costs reduced by 50%. So it has made such an impact for so many families. And I'm so glad we were able to get that done.
So we're going to move on now to the last segment, which is called the world of politics around us, where we'll talk about a bit about this world of politics that surrounds us. So first off, I always like to start this segment with you and who inspires you. So the first question is, who is or who was another politician or some politicians that inspire you as an MP?
That was an easy one for me, actually. Judy LaMarche. You're familiar with her, probably, are you? Being a political one?
Yeah.
Okay. So she was the second female federal cabinet minister back in the 60s, she was, and under the government of Lester Pearson. And she was appointed Minister of Health and Welfare. So in that portfolio, she worked on Medicare and the Canada Pension Plan. So lasting legacy pieces that she worked on. Then she was named Canada's Secretary of State, where she worked on establishing the Royal Commission on the Status of Women that really looked at the whole equality and equity piece of women, which we still struggle with today, but a lot of progress has been made. And she was also in charge of coordinating Canada's centennial festivities in 1967. So those are two big things. And so she was only in politics for 10 years, but she accomplished so much. And then after that, she went on to author about 3 books and had a very successful broadcasting and media career. So at the time, it was definitely the boys' club and a man's world then. Like, it's still hard for female politicians, I have to say. But there wasn't even a women's washroom for federal cabinet ministers when she was in cabinet because they didn't expect to have female cabinet ministers. That shows. So we have made some progress. But so I find that very inspirational that she accomplished great things at a very challenging time for women in politics.
Well, definitely, and it's important to see how far we've come, but it's also important to see how much further things need to go. I mean, we look at situations like that, and it's so proud to everybody's proud to see that how far things have come with, gender balanced cabinet and lots of parties running women cabinet ministers, well, potential cabinet ministers, sorry, candidates in elections. And it's just looking at how much farther there can go and looking at how much more can be done for this. But we'll go on now to the last question, which is one that I always like to spend some time on. And it's, what do you think is an issue that needs to be focused on more?
I think the biggest challenge we're facing right now, quite frankly, all across the country, from coast to coast to coast, is the lack of affordable housing. It's such a challenge. And we're bringing in a lot of immigration, which we need to. And because we need the immigrants, and there's a lot of people that need to come to Canada, many refugees. But, affordable housing, we're way behind on that. And it's going to take all 3 levels of government working together to crack this nut. Municipal, provincial, federal. We all have a role to play and things we can contribute. And we really have to pick up the pace. One of the most challenging parts is, and it ties directly into immigration, we don't have the manpower or women power, because now we're getting women in trades too, thankfully, to build these affordable housings. And, that's a challenge. So there are many challenges on that portfolio, but it's so important. And everybody is entitled to have an affordable roof over their head. And I mean, especially in the climate that we have here in Canada, you can't be living outdoors year round. So I think that's our greatest challenge.
Well, definitely, and it's an issue that that every level of government, like you said, needs to focus on more. You know, we're in this housing crisis, and there are a lot of people that are struggling to make ends meet, and looking at not just, well, just generally looking at all the people that need housing, whether they are young people that need housing or people that are homeless on the streets and that need helping, and there's just so much that we can do for this. And like you said, it'll take collaboration from all levels of government to get this done.
And there's a lot of potential solutions and different types of housing. We have to start thinking outside the box and the traditional two-story family home on a big suburban lot. We have to improve the density because that's if Canada's biggest challenge, quite frankly, is we're too big and too underpopulated. We have this vast land, which is gorgeous and amazing, but it's not really very efficient. And everybody lives within 200 kilometers of the 49th parallel, right? And but all spread out. And we have a low domestic market, which makes our prices high. So we really depend on exporting. We have to always be vigilant that we don't get the international markets shut to us because we don't have a big enough domestic market to survive. So these are challenges. I mean, a lot of countries would love to have our problems, but they are unique and they are challenges.
Definitely, and something that will need to be continued to be focused on over the next few years in federal government and in all governments, really. So that's all for today. Thanks, Valerie, so much for joining me.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, it was so great having you. And if you like this interview, make sure to check out my other interview with Valerie on YouTube for Top 10. If you're watching this on the day of the premiere, it's going to be coming out on Friday. Let's Discuss Politics is a VCalla production. So until the next video, I'm Vincenzo Calla, signing out.